Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Hannah and I am a young mom of my 1-year-old daughter, Felicity. But today I thought I would just talk to you guys about the things they do not tell you, the things that I wish that I had known when it came to postpartum. Now, there are a lot of things on this list, but postpartum is one of those things that I feel like nobody really talks about. They will talk about the birth or breastfeeding or whatever, but postpartum is kind of like this taboo topic that you don't really get a lot of information on, but it happens to everyone in some way, shape, or form. So I thought I would go ahead and talk to you guys about that today because these are things that I wish that I had known going into the postpartum period. First thing that nobody tells you is that when your baby comes out and you've already delivered your placenta and you're sitting there and you're holding it, it's so great and it's so wonderful, they start giving you a massage. That's what they call it. It's technically a massage. They are rubbing on your stomach, but they are giving you the hardest, most painful massage on your stomach that you will ever have in your entire life. And it hurts because you're like, I'm kind of swollen. I just kind of went through all this really trauma, not saying that I had a traumatic birth, but like all this trauma with like pushing this baby out and like all these hours of labor, and now you're like pressing, like physically like pressing on your stomach to try to get any like blood or clots or anything out to see if you'd be hemorrhaging or what they would need to do. And it honestly really sucks, and that was something that I was not prepared for going into birth, and that I kind of wish that I had known. I feel like maybe I had heard one person say it one time, but outside of that, like it wasn't something that I remembered going into the whole labor and delivery process. And when I got done with that, I was like, wow, this actually really sucks. They do it like every couple hours too, and that is something that I wish that I had known going into this whole postpartum journey. The second thing that they don't tell you after giving birth is that you cannot wipe down there. For the most part, usually you're pretty swollen. You might have even had stitches if you had to have an episiotomy or if you have torn. And so you were given this little guy. There are actually fancier versions of this that I think like Freedom Mom or something has. But basically you would fill this up with like room temperature to warm water, and then you literally just spray yourself down there, and then you have to like pat yourself dry, and that's literally how you have to wipe after going to the bathroom every time. Now, we now use this to water our cactuses, or I guess our cacti, and sometimes Felicity will get it and spray the water all over the floor, and occasionally my husband will even use this. But yes, they will give you this usually in the hospital or in the birth center. It's just one of those things that like you can't wipe down there, so you gotta clean it off somehow. The third thing that they don't tell you about is that you hear about pad sickles, but you don't know how much you need or love them until you have used them. In the hospital, they kind of give you this thing where it's almost like a glow stick kind of thing, where you basically would break it, and then my nurse actually showed me to spray some water on it with the Perry bottle, and so it's like extra cold, so whenever you're putting this thing, basically this ice pack, into your underwear, it's like nice and cold and it feels really good, and it helps with swelling and all those things. But I didn't realize how much I would love that until I used one, and it was like the greatest thing ever, because you know, you're swollen, it's painful after you've just pushed a baby out of you, and those first like 24 to 48 hours, having that pad sickle on your crotch is like the greatest thing ever. So the fourth thing they don't tell you about postpartum is that when you're breastfeeding, if you choose to breastfeed, your uterus will actually contract back down to its like normal size. It basically, your body releases a hormone while you're breastfeeding for your uterus to contract back down. And that actually is low-key kind of painful. For me, it felt like period cramps, but some people say that it's really severe. I don't know, I guess there's different pain tolerances, but they do say that with each baby that you have, the contracting of your uterus when you're breastfeeding actually gets worse. So like baby number 1, like sometimes people don't even need medicine, whereas baby number 2 or 3, they're like, oh my gosh, I need some ibuprofen or something to help with the contraction pain. or like that cramping pain from breastfeeding because your uterus is like coming back down, and for whatever reason it just gets more painful. Which leads me to number 5, your boobs, whether or not you choose to breastfeed, you will have your milk come in and your boobs will just leak everywhere all the time at random times, whether it's a feeding time or you hear a random person's kid cry, even if it's on the TV, or you think about your baby or whatever, you just will like leak all the time. And I had to actually get some like nursing pads. I got the reusable ones because I felt like with how much I was leaking, even though I was like nursing and using a Haka every single time I was nursing, I was just leaking all the time. And so I got the reusable ones so I could just wash them, and those were divine. I also feel like for me, the whatever cotton or whatever that they use for like disposable pads and like breast pads, it makes me really itchy and I don't really know why. Cotton that I would use with my clothes doesn't, but cotton for those disposable things make me really itchy, and I used those disposable pads probably once and like my whole boob where it was just like red and inflamed and itchy, so I just didn't use them again. And the ones that I used were made out of like an organic bamboo velour, and those were really awesome, and I got those up with Amazon. Yeah, you will just be like leaking all the time. And that's kind of something that I wish that I had known, is that like you're just going to milk is just gonna go kind of everywhere. Number 6. So something that they did tell me about postpartum is that you can have postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. But 2 things that they didn't tell me that were actually probably equally as common is postpartum rage and postpartum OCD. Now, I never really struggled with postpartum anxiety or depression, like maybe postpartum anxiety a little bit here and there, but it wasn't all that bad. But I had struggled with anxiety and depression before getting pregnant and everything. I actually felt like my anxiety during my pregnancy and during postpartum actually got better, and my depression also got better. But when it came to postpartum rage, that was something I'd never really experienced before, was like a feeling of rage, and it was mostly towards like my main trigger was my husband. Like to me, in my mind, he was dealing with his own things with like him having to work and the pandemic and all these different things that he was trying to navigate, being a new dad and all these things. And to me, for whatever reason, during especially the first probably 4 or 5 months of Felicity's life, in my head, I was like, I don't understand why he's not helping as much when he really was. And he was also working, and like he was just working from home. So he couldn't help me all day long. He still had a job to do, but he was just working from home, and like it was just all these different things. So that would frustrate me, and then I would just like yell at him. And I was like, I didn't understand, and so I'd get so mad at him. I'd call him these like awful names, and apparently postpartum rage is a thing, and I did have to talk to somebody about that because I was like, whoa, I didn't know that this was a thing, and I didn't realize that it was even a thing until probably, again, 4 or 5 months into Felicity's life, where I was like, oh my gosh, why am I so mad all the time? And then I also was struggling with OCD, which I had kind of had before getting pregnant, but it got really bad after giving birth for whatever reason. And those were 2 things that I had no idea even were a thing. I knew about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, but I had no idea about postpartum rage or postpartum OCD. The 7th thing that they don't really tell you is that it takes a while for your belly to go back down. Right after you give birth to your baby, they say on average that your belly goes back to like your 6-month size of being pregnant. For me, I did not find that that was true of the 6-month size. I was like probably closer to like 3 or 4 month size, but I was too big still for my regular clothes and too small for my maternity clothes. So everyone is true in that, where it's like, I don't really know what size to be wearing right now. I'm kind of stuck in this halfway in between, but you definitely do still have like a pooch, like a belly afterwards. After giving birth to Felicity, I actually lost like a lot of my baby weight pretty much off the bat because of all of the fluid coming out of me, the baby coming out of me, the placenta coming out of me, and all that extra blood and everything. So I lost that pretty fast, but then it probably took me, granted I wasn't trying, but it probably took me up until, honestly, I still have a little bit of a belly now. I still have baby weight. Granted, I'm not in a rush to get rid of it. It doesn't bother me that it's there, so I'm not like trying to get rid of all my baby weight. And I only gained 30 pounds in my pregnancy, whereas I know some people gain 60 plus pounds in their pregnancy. So I was definitely on the lower end of like weight gain. So I kind of lost all that relatively quickly, and then like the extra bit just kind of slowly went down. and now I can fit back into my pre-maternity clothes, but it's just a little bit tighter. Okay, the 8th thing that they don't tell you about postpartum is that especially those first couple of probably months, maybe the first 2 to 3 months, you will smell different. I feel like I could literally sit there and do this and smell my skin. Like I smelled so strong and my BO got really bad. I literally couldn't find a deodorant that would work for me for like months. And they say that the reason why it does that is because your baby's eyesight is very poor. They use my smell to make it to where they know where to come from mama and where to nurse so that they can continually get food, which I think that's really interesting. I don't know, it's one of those weird things that I kind of like, but also it's like, ugh, I just remember feeling like I stunk all the time, but I could just like smell my skin for the first time or something. I don't know. It was so weird. So the 9th thing that they don't tell you about when it comes to postpartum is that you will have hot flashes. Usually they come in the form of like night sweats and then when you're breastfeeding. I mainly remember them whenever I was breastfeeding. Like literally I'd be sitting there and Felicity would be nursing and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I'm so hot. I'm covered in sweat. I'd be like sitting in front of the AC vent and then also had like a fan on me and I'm sitting there just like dying of sweat. Granted, I also had Felicity right before summer hit in California. In California, if you know, in the summer, it gets up to like 100 degrees plus. Some of the days it was like 108, 112 degrees outside and it was just so hot and I'd be nursing and like I was so sweaty all the time, and like at night you're sweaty and it's just like you just kind of feel wet and you kind of feel gross for the first couple months after you have a baby. But I promise it doesn't stay that way. It does get better. You're not always going to be sweaty and nasty and gross all the time. Number 10 is going to be your pelvic floor probably will need some help. Incontinence is a thing. I was about 11 months postpartum whenever I started seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist, and that was honestly one of the best decisions I've ever made. I never really had an issue with like peeing myself, I guess, but my issue was I felt like I was literally going to poo myself all the time. Every morning, if I was not going to the bathroom, like as soon as I woke up, I literally felt like I was going to like just go to the bathroom on myself. Like I didn't have to worry about laughing too hard or sneezing or coughing or something and peeing on myself. Like it was the other end of my body. And I was like, this to me is almost worse. Like I would much rather sneeze and pee a little bit than sneeze and be scared that I'm going to like pass gas or like poop on myself. So that was the best decision I've ever made, is to get that pelvic floor physical therapist, because ever since meeting with her and like doing all the exercises that she's recommending for me, because for me, I didn't have like too weak of muscles. I had literally too tight of muscles, and I had to learn how to relax my pelvic floor so that I wouldn't want to poop myself all the time. And that was like the best thing ever, because literally for like 11 months straight, every single day from the time I gave birth to Felicity until the time I started doing these exercises, I was struggling with this. So 10 out of 10 would recommend that if you were having any issues pelvic floor wise, I would go get a pelvic floor physical therapist. It's kind of uncomfortable, but man, oh man, are they helpful, and you will thank me for it. The 11th thing that they don't tell you about postpartum, which maybe some people do kind of mention this. I do remember hearing about this from my midwife. So she did kind of warn me about this, but I didn't know the severity of how bad it would be. And that is that your hair will start to fall out around 3 to 4 months postpartum, because your hormones start to shift. So like all of these tiny little hairs that you're seeing right now are actually all the growth that's coming back from me losing my hair. I felt like I probably lost about half of my hair. I actually have a whole patch under here. It's about 1 inch long, and so I kind of have to keep it covered because I'm really insecure about it, if I'm honest. So yeah, like all these little baby hairs are just, honestly, you can see like these down here. I'm not even kidding when I say I would like run a brush through my hair, and by the time I was done brushing my hair, I would start with an empty brush. I would have a brush full of hair at the end of it. It was so gross. That is something that they don't tell you, or that they might even like kind of forewarn you about. It will probably be worse than what you're thinking it'll be. The 12th thing that they honestly kind of forewarn you about, but I didn't, again, know the severity of it, is that the more you're resting, usually the faster down here you will heal and the faster you'll stop bleeding. But the more you are like active and trying to get things done, usually the longer you will bleed. They give you like massive pads. I use massive pads, like literally, this is one of the ones that I used whenever I was postpartum, and like I'd stick this under my underwear, and then I'd spray this stuff on, and then I'd like put the tux pads down, and then I'd have to pull them up, and I literally would do that every day. It's just like a really long process, honestly. Like going to the bathroom whenever you're postpartum is just like a really long process. That's another thing that they don't tell you. So I guess like number 13 is that the process of going to the bathroom takes way longer than you thought that it would, because there's all these like sprays and things that you have to do just to help with the healing process, especially if you've had a tear or an episiotomy or something like that. And so I was doing that for a while, and for like probably the first week of my period I was using these like really big long pads like these, and then I kind of went down to something shorter, but like I kind of went down to liners, and then I just like I just remember after maybe like 2 weeks or so, I kind of got down to like spotting. It went like heavy period, light period, spotting, and then I just continued to spot for like 6 weeks until I was like 6 weeks postpartum. And I thought it was done, so I was like up, being more active, whatever, and I'd gotten clearance to like have sex again and all those kinds of things and like work out. But I guess my body wasn't ready to be done, because I literally continued to spot for another 3 weeks. I spotted for 9 weeks after I gave birth to Felicity. I felt like at that point I didn't have to use like the spray or whatever, like these massive pads. I just had to use liners. But still, like my midwife gave me this example, and she kind of did tell me about it, but I also didn't really listen to her. And it's also something that nobody else told me, that like basically the more active I was being during my postpartum period, the more it was like I was sitting there picking at a scab, and like the longer that I would pick at the scab, the worse the bleeding would be and the longer it would last. And that's something I really, for whatever reason, just didn't take into account. Like I thought I was fine because I felt physically fine. I was just still bleeding a little bit. I didn't have any pain or anything at that point. I was just like bleeding. I don't know. It was just going on. And so I wish I would have listened and rested a lot more than I did, and allowed my body to stop bleeding, because I feel like I probably would have stopped bleeding around 5 or 6 weeks instead of week 9, because of the fact that I just wasn't resting. So yeah, those are, I guess, the 13 things that they don't really tell you about when it comes to being postpartum. I'm pretty sure there's probably more. If you have one, please comment below something that I either didn't experience, I just genuinely don't remember, because postpartum was 14 months ago for me. But I hope this actually really helps you guys, and that it helps you to prepare for if you are like a mama to be, or you know somebody who just gave birth or something. These are hopefully little things that give you an insight onto either what's going to happen in the future, or maybe you've already had this happen, or maybe you're trying to help a friend or a family member who's going through this. This is what they're going through after they have had a baby. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe down below. Thanks you guys, and I will see you next week. I almost just said when you deliver your uterus. No, you don't deliver your uterus. I knew about anxiety, depression, and